Welcome to the Health Leader Forge, where today's health leaders help to forge the leaders of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mark Bonica, of the University of New Hampshire's Department of Health Management and Policy and the Northern New England Association of Healthcare Executives. Our website is healthleaderforge.org, where you can find information about subscribing to the podcast, links and information related to the episode, as well as our complete archives. Today's guest is Jill Gravink, the founder and executive director of Northeast Passage. Jill founded Northeast Passage in 1990 as a means of bringing recreational therapy out of the inpatient setting and into the community. Northeast Passage works with people who have physical and mental disabilities, using sport and leisure activities to improve the quality of the client's life and to, as they say at Northeast Passage, live beyond disability. Northeast Passage works with everyone from children to combat veterans, treating more than 3,000 clients last year. In this podcast, Jill tells the story of how Northeast Passage came to be and what it took to grow the organization from just her operating out of the trunk of her car to where it is today. We also discuss how organizations like Northeast Passage are well poised to contribute to the future of healthcare as the industry shifts to outcomes and value-based reimbursement, and conclude with a discussion about leadership. So, welcome to the Forge, Jill.
Thank you.
So you attended the University of New Hampshire and you earned your degree in leisure management and tourism with a therapeutic recreation option, and you also got a minor in physical education. How come you came to UNH and how did you choose therapeutic recreation?
Well, I actually ended up at UNH a little bit by accident. I was a ski racer and I had planned to go to the University of Vermont for physical therapy. And I went up and met with their ski team coach, and we didn't get along. So I came back to ski for the University of New Hampshire. And
what kind of skiing? Did you downhill?
Alpine, yeah, alpine skiing. Okay. So slalom, giant slalom at the time. And so UNH became my first choice because of skiing versus curriculum. So I entered as physical education major at the time.
Okay.
That was a pre-physical therapy.
Okay.
Then while I was here, I found out about recreation therapy, which is a relatively new profession at the time. Yeah. And I was like, wow, that's actually really what I meant all along, was to be able to help people with disabilities get out and be active and engaged again. And so that's sort of how I found the field.
Okay. So we had talked earlier about, I was not familiar with the field of recreational therapy. So could you give us kind of an idea of what that is and kind of where it came from?
Sure. So recreational therapy, I'll give you the hard definition. I'll read that one for you, and then I'll give you sort of another version that is what I use. So recreation therapy means the treatment service designed to restore, remediate, and rehabilitate a person's level of functioning and independence in life activities to promote health and wellness, as well as reduce or eliminate the activity limitations and restrictions to participation in life situations caused by illness or disabling conditions. So that's the book version of what it is. Essentially, what I always say is that a rec therapist is a person who uses recreation, sport, leisure activities that are relevant to a person's life as a way and a context for functional improvement. Okay. So if I am a person with a spinal cord injury and I need to learn how to do transfers to be able to move from one place to another, if the motivation is that I also want to be a sled hockey player, learning that transfer from your wheelchair down to a sled on the ice is incredibly challenging. But once you master that, any other transfer is going to be a piece of cake for you. So we'll use that content, the context of recreation and sort of the intrinsic motivation of an individual in a purposeful way to accomplish functional outcomes.
Okay. So I learned how to transfer myself from my wheelchair to a sled. That also applies to transferring myself to a chair, to some other...
a chair in a restaurant or a bus. When people come out of rehabilitation, they often know how to transfer from one level surface to another level surface. Okay. But in life, that doesn't always happen. Okay. And so what if I'm in a parking space in a dirt parking lot? And so it's not, I pull my chair out and it's not a level transfer. Or, the wheels aren't solid on the ground. If this is the first time that I've had to do a transfer like that, that's going to be very intimidating. And if we can teach that transfer in a variety of recreational settings, any transfer that you're going to accomplish that you're going to see in your work or anything that life is going to throw at you, you'll have a better perspective on how to do that, and you'll have skills to be able to do that.
Right. So, and then the intrinsic motivation you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of the art of therapeutic recreation, is really getting to know your client and being able to find out what it is that makes them tick, and then being able to use what it is, that definition of themselves or how they want to see themselves in the world, as a tool to help their own well-being. And we're the facilitators of making that happen. So, we always, at Northeast Passage, we talk about the concept of define, pursue, achieve. And so the first step is really an assessment with an individual where we're looking at them and we're saying, give me the definition of you. Don't put any activity on it, but what is critical to the essence of you? Social, outdoors, family. Those are the sort of the hints that then we're able to take and apply as intrinsic motivation to get this person to move towards a healthier life or learning hard skills. And that's the pursue part, is where we sort of bring together the essence of who this person is, their interests, and their goals. Our job is to put those two things together and help it to be successful. And then the achieve is the accomplishment of the goal.
Neat.
So.
Okay. So when did recreational therapy become its own field?
It goes back. I think that the inklings were back with, honestly, Florence Nightingale in nursing and Jane Hall in social work. And they were the first people to start to really look at, wow, good things happen when people are recreating and are pursuing sport or a recreation activity. How can we unlock those inherent benefits of recreation and sport and apply them to our clients? So Florence Nightingale was, there was a lot of people, veterans were dying when they were coming off the battlefield, and she found that if she was able to get them engaged in some meaningful activities, that their life expectancy was better, their survival rate was better. And Jane Hall was working with, created Hall House, which was working with people who were in poverty, and she was finding the same things. We progressed through each war. After each war and working with veterans, there was more organization. But it really wasn't until the 70s or 80s that it started to take its, 60s and 70s that it really started to take form as a true profession. Our first national credentialing body was not until 1981. So it was a very new profession when I came into it. In its current form, it was a new profession, even though its roots are very old.
Okay.
So.
All right. So you received your certification as a therapeutic recreation specialist in 1986, shortly after you graduated from UNH. What was involved with getting your certification at that time? So
to be certified, you have to graduate from an accredited program. A 4-year bachelor's program is the entry-level degree. You have to complete a 14-week internship under the supervision of a certified therapist. And then you have to pass a national credentialing examination. So it's similar to occupational therapy, physical therapy, in terms of the track and the path that you have to take to become a certified therapist. So that's that process.
All right. So your first job was working as an inpatient therapist in physical rehabilitation.
Right.
What does inpatient physical rehabilitation therapist do? And where were you working?
So I was working at Northeast Rehabilitation Hospital in Salem, New Hampshire, as an inpatient therapist. And so what an inpatient therapist does is, in rehab, it's an interesting thing. One of the reasons I started Northeast Passage is because I didn't feel like I had enough opportunity to work with my clients as an inpatient therapist. But as an inpatient therapist, what you're doing is you're really honing in on functional skills. They're getting building blocks in physical therapy, they're getting building blocks in OT and speech, depending on what their disability is. And what we try to do is put some of those building block skills together for your client while you're in there. And again, trying to use something that's relevant for them. So, for example, I'll stay with spinal cord injury right now. If you have someone that has a C5 level spinal cord injury, so they're going to have biceps, they're not going to have hand function, but if you flex and extend your wrist, your hand will open and close. So teaching someone with that level of injury how to use their wrist to open and close their hand to pick things up is something that they would be working on in occupational therapy. What I would do is, if I had a client that was interested in playing chess, I would take and put like pipe cleaners on chess pieces. And we would play a game of chess that would get engaged in a whole nother realm of conversation, but at the same time, my client, my patient, would be working on picking up those chess pieces by, instead of using the grip of his fingers, being able to use the flexion and extension of his wrist.
Okay.
And then I would leave that board with him. Often I would get patients that say, this is a catastrophic injury. My family comes in, we sit, we stare at each other, we don't know what to say because, oh my gosh, what is the rest of our life going to look like? So I'd leave the chessboard there, and now they're playing chess at night, and it's giving them some sense of normalcy and some sense of how their life used to be.
Okay.
So.
Okay, great. You eventually became the senior staff therapist and director of aquatics at Northeast Rehabilitation Hospital. How did you use aquatics for therapy?
So where I was working with aquatics, I was working primarily on the chronic pain unit at that point. And so using aquatics for buoyancy to allow exercise to happen in an environment that was less painful for a lot of our clients. So it was an exercise program, but I would also do water safety and adapted aquatics, so teaching people how to swim again after an injury, as well as water safety. If I'm out on a boat and I've had a brain injury and the first time I end up in the water is by accident, can I flip myself over and get face up in the water? So it was teaching those basic survival in the water after disability, teaching swimming strokes, and then pain management.
So while you were working at Northeast Rehabilitation Hospital, you actually started Northeast Passage. And this was back in 1990. Mm-hmm. What was it that inspired you to found the organization? What was your original vision for Northeast Passage?
I think that at first, when I came back, I did my internship in inpatient rehab as well. And when I came back to finish up my schooling, my senior thesis I did on basically creating a program that would ultimately be Northeast Passage. It was called Beyond Rehab. Okay. Because what I was seeing in rehab, both on my internship and when I got my first job, was that it's Maslow. It's hierarchy of needs. If I have just had a catastrophic injury, my first need is to figure out, how am I going to eat? How am I going to go to the bathroom, get out of bed? Clothing, shelter, food, all of those things. And so recreation, I found in those places, even though we were working on functional skills, almost felt like a distraction at times to patients. And it wasn't until they were out that they were like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? And also not being comfortable with the skills that they had learned in a structured environment when they were in a community setting. So they come from a place where everybody understands disability, everybody can answer any question, the building is fully accessible, and then we push them out into the world, and it's like, I had clients coming back and saying, it felt like you dropped me off a cliff and asked me to fly. Okay. And so the vision for Northeast Passage was really to be that transition for those clients when they came out, like, here's someone that understands, here's someone that can translate this world for you and take those building block skills and help you put them into action out in this community setting.
Okay. Were there other organizations that were providing that service at that time?
So there were other adaptive sports organizations.
Okay.
And adaptive sports is sort of the final stage of therapeutic recreation in some of the models. It's recreation participation. And what I wanted to develop with Northeast Passage was to have those adapted sports programs that people could come and participate in, but I also wanted to be able to take a therapeutic view of it and get more engaged with our clients and seeing, what's preventing you from getting to that sport. So a lot of people would disappear. They'd come out of rehab and they'd just disappear. They may have been a very active person before their injury, but they would just disappear into the community, and you wouldn't see them again unless something bad happened and they came back to the hospital. And so what was happening in there? What was happening that this person who were the ones that weren't able to fly after we pushed them out of the nest, the rehab nest? Okay. And so I wanted to develop something that would be a catch for those guys, as well as just a really good experience for the guys that were thriving and succeeding.
Okay.
So
So who were your first clients? How did you kind of start doing this? Did you start doing it before you actually created the organization?
I created the organization because I needed to have a structure for that to happen. And you can't rent a facility, you can't do anything unless you have liability insurance, which, to get liability insurance, I needed to be an organization. And so I started the organization while I was working at Northeast Rehab. And my first clients were those that were being discharged. And my first volunteers were other therapists that had an invested interest in these clients' success. And so I started decreasing my hours at Northeast Rehab as the demands of Northeast Passage started to increase. Okay. And so at that point, it came that sort of time when I had to make a decision of whether this was going to, this was going to fly, or if it was going to just sort of fade off or trickle on along. And so that's when I took the leap, and I had 6 months of funding and took the leap with, if I give this 100% effort, are we going to be able to make it turn into a full-time thing that I can actually buy groceries?
Which is important.
Which is important,
Yeah.
So that's actually when UNH came into the picture, because I had graduated from the University of New Hampshire, and I was at an expo with Lou Powell, who was my professor at the time. And we started talking about, I was like, this is so cool what's happening, but at the same time, I'm just struggling with being able to keep it going. And, I need more time, all of those things. And she was like, we have an empty office that if you'd like to set up an office space there, we'll kind of hide you there a little bit, and you can, have a phone, and you'll have a computer, and, and you'll have some of our expertise to sort of pick off of. And Janet Sable, another professor who I actually is a mentor of mine, said, come on, make the jump, and we'll write a federal grant to try to make this happen. Oh. So we didn't have the grant, but we knew that we needed the time to be able to write the grant and make this thing come to.
So you said you had 6 months of funding.
Yes.
Was that like bankrolled out of your pocket, or was did you have a donor? Or?
Yeah, I had a couple of little donors, a couple of small sponsors, Orthotics and Prosthetic Clinic, and I had a grant from the Seacoast Foundation for Health. Okay. And Danny's team. So I had those 3 grants cobbled together. At that time, it was like $36,000, I think. Okay. That I knew I had that would program and give me some money to live on. Okay. And so this was sort of my fly or die moment, and we came together and we wrote the grant and we got it. Okay. And that was our first federal grant.
So was that the Partners?
That was Partners.
Okay, so you came to UNH. Was this in 1993 then?
This was 1993.
Okay. And you became a clinical professor at some point.
I became a clinical professor.
What is that?
So a clinical professor is one that deals with, at the time, it was the position that I was able to go into as a grant-funded position. So I was partly UNH grant-funded as a clinical professor, and partly funded directly out of Northeast Passage, a separate private nonprofit organization. And so as a clinical professor, I was managing that grant. Okay. And I was teaching a class on the side to supplement some income and teaching some labs to supplement income. And that's what my role as a clinical professor was. Manage the federal grant and teach a couple of classes.
Okay. So what was the Partners grant all about?
So Partners was Northeast Passage. It was the vision that I had for Northeast Passage. And at the time, the Department of Education, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services, was offering grants to get basically community resources started for people with disabilities. And I have to say that we were probably the perfect example of that. That was the seed money that really got us going. It allowed me to go full-time. It allowed me to hire one other staff. It allowed for us to do proof of concept. We had been sort of just scrambling along I'd get $200 in the bank, down to $200 in the checking account and run a raffle, be like, we've got a paddling clinic coming up. I need, $500 to pay my instructor. We'd run a raffle,
Wow.
So we've been kind of scrambling along like that.
Bake sales and raffles kind of.
Bake sales and raffles, grassroots kind of.
Wow.
How do we just keep that going? All volunteer, out of the trunk of the car, equipment that we had was
volunteers? I had therapist volunteers that you knew?
Every one of my friends suddenly became very much involved in my friends and family, and other therapists at the rehab that, I would drag them out on weekends to be doing this. And it wasn't even dragging out, because it was an opportunity to see what happened to people once they got out of rehab. And I think that a lot of therapists that are inpatient wonder, what is that next step for my patient? And for those therapists to be able to, take someone that they were really worried out and be canoeing down a river with them and be like, all right, they're okay. Or, I think that was really fulfilling for them. So it wasn't dragging them out. They were all like, yeah, sure, I'm in,
Sure.
Friends and family sometimes, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Guess what? That was. Did
you know you were going canoeing?
did you know? I got a plan for you.
Great.
And but we were sort of kind of rumbling along like that, very patchwork. And then when we got the grant, I had these concepts. I wanted to be creating opportunities for people that wanted to come and get skills and then be able to take them back and play with their friends and family and not have to always be tied to a program.
Okay.
I wanted to create the social experience for people that felt that they were isolated and did want a place to come when they did want to play. Really asking clients, what is it that's preventing you from being successful in the community? And it was, well, when I show up at a typical recreation facility, they don't know what to do with me. And so how could we go and have an impact on that environment? So we ran all of our programs out in community settings and worked with the community setting to improve their own accessibility, so it was a sustainable environment.
Can you give an example of an organization that maybe partnered with you?
So we worked with the National Forest on what are good things to do with accessible campgrounds. We worked with health clubs about, this was just after ADA. So
okay.
this was. And
ADA is?
Americans with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
So this was when there was still some pushback about making things accessible. Well, people with disabilities never come here. And I'm like, well, because there's 6 steps to get into your, So
Sure.
So we would work, with a state park. We'd go into the park and do an assessment and say, we're going to come here and we're going to run a cycling event on your bike trails. But the pathway to your bathroom is really rough. And can we look at a different pathway to set that up? Can we, water ski sites, so we'd have waterfronts, talking to them about, here's a way, if we reserve this table, this is the closest and it has actually a solid surface for them to get to water, as opposed to over there, the rocks and so we'd start helping them and then helping them become more accessible and starting to think with universal design. And then also showing our clients that you can advocate for yourself in this setting and you can come back to this setting.
You just used the phrase universal design.
Yes.
Is that a term that's used within the disability
It is a term, it's sort of I would say it's the disability side of the whole larger concept of sustainability and building positive environments and communities. And so universal design is the concept of building something so that it works for everyone. And the perfect example I use for that is when you look at a mall, you go into a mall and there's the ramp and there's the steps. Well, who uses the ramp? Well, it's the UPS guy, it's the moms with strollers, and it's people in wheelchairs. So that's a perfect example of universal design. Shoveling the ramp first in a snowstorm. Well, there's so many more people that use the steps, but can they use the ramp? Oh yeah, they can use the ramp. So a person with a disability can use the ramp, so can the non-disabled person. Shovel the ramp first, if you only got so much time. That's a universal design kind of concept, is just thinking in ways that work for everyone, as opposed to thinking, well, the masses will use this, so we can't do something special just for people with disabilities. Well, it's not really special.
Because everybody can.
Because everybody can use it.
Right.
So that's the concept of universal design.
Okay, that makes sense. So at this point you had one employee.
Yes.
Lots of volunteers.
Lots of volunteers.
Lots of friends and family.
Yes, lots of friends and family.
How many clients did you have at that point?
Let's see.
Roughly.
We started hitting 100 clients. So my first year we had 23. Last year we had over 3,000.
Wow.
In the early 90s, in the first few years of the grant, we were topping 100 and growing every year. So it was steady progress. In the 96, 97, I added another employee. 98, 99, I added 2 more. 2000, I added 2 more. So it was, I look at the grant years as water on the plant. It was a seed of an idea. It had some great momentum, but it needed that grant funding to give us, those grants were 3 years each. And first year 100% funding, second year 75, third year 50. And then you had to sustain. But it gave us the opportunity to say, look, the federal government believed in us, the University of New Hampshire believes in us, come on and help me make this match. And then we were able to get another one to start another aspect of the program. And we got 3 of those. And so that was 9 years of funding that gave me leverage to go out and find more money by saying, I need you for this federal match. And then we were able to start to diversify our revenue streams and think more broadly about sustainability after grants, after those federal grants.
Okay.
Because as the political climate changed, so did those grants. But they did what they needed to do for us. They brought us from serving 23 people a year to probably by 2000 we were over 1,000 people in a year, and that's
huge growth.
That's huge growth.
Yeah.
And
so sustainability post grant. What do you mean by that?
So once once we had outlived sort of the mission of those grants, which was startup, as well as those grants had decreased and really started to go away, how are we going to look at the development of Northeast Passage as a sustainable entity? And it was scary because we were heavily grant, we were 50 to 80% grant funded. And I could see that coming, that endpoint coming in about 2004. So in 2000, that's when we started talking about the merge with the university and planning, really giving ourselves a 3 to 4 year head start in planning about how we were going to make this a sustainable entity. How are we going to diversify revenue streams? What other grants were available, but knowing that federal funding was going to decrease, how could we increase our donor presence? How could we increase fees for service? What else was out there as a mechanism to start to fund this organization?
Okay, so you were charging people to participate at some point.
We charged very small fees because, and with the rec sports, I wanted to stay with a small fee, but we did determine that we were going to charge a fee. That's the reality. If we are going to help people develop skills to be independently accessing recreation in the community, they have to understand that everybody in the world pays for that. And if you want true equality, it goes both ways. So we always wanted to charge some fee, but we didn't want it to be a prohibitive fee. Because the reality is that 29% of people with disability live at the poverty level, 40% are underemployed. So recognizing that money is a barrier, we wanted to find that balance point to charge a fee, which also increases accountability. By the way, when it's a free service, no-shows are rampant. When there's a fee, people show up. And so, there's that whole value system that's in there. If it's free, Right. But if I paid for it, then there's value.
Interesting.
So there's that whole sort of, all of those mechanisms working together. So, but we did want to pay, but we understood that recreation, the rec sports side of our program, was never going to be funded by fee for service because of the demographics of the group that we were serving. I always say it's a terrible business model. Right now, our adapted sports cost us about $180 per person to run, and we get between 20 and 50. So that's the deficit on our adapted sports programs that we're trying to make up for every person that we work with. And
so you cross-subsidize the adaptive sports with the therapy? Is that what you're saying?
We cross-subsidize the adapted sports with donations, grants, fundraising events, those streams. The recreation therapy side, we were developing as a different model.
Okay.
So to sort of move into the...
Sure.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
So moving into the rec therapy side, in about 96-ish, we started seeing our clients coming to our rec sports programs that were less prepared than they had been initially. And so what's going on? Why are these guys not able to do the transfer from the ground to their chair? Pretty much most of them that are new injuries. And we started seeing that with rehab, the length of stay was going down. And so they were literally coming out with the basic skills as opposed to more advanced functional skills. So all along we had been trying to help people put those skills back together, but it started to look like we really needed something more comprehensive to do that. So we developed our PATH model, which was one of our federal grants.
Okay.
And in the early days, we worked primarily with physical disability. And so we were on spinal cord injury. And so we wrote a grant. We received funding from New Hampshire Healthcare in Transition and the Unum Foundation to develop a research project and do a pilot project on spinal cord injury transition. So we would catch people immediately after coming out of rehab and follow them for a year after discharge. Putting together all of those pieces, making sure that, what's preventing you from getting out there, and really digging in with assessment and goal setting and sort of being the fork in the side and making sure they weren't developing bad habits. Again, using recreation as the context for that. With our pilot study and the research design, we were able to get a National NIDR grant, National Institute of Disability and Rehabilitation Research, on developing this model and doing the research to determine if we actually were decreasing secondary conditions and improving outcomes for people transitioning with spinal cord injury.
Okay.
The results of that were good. We were able to then move forward and get a contract with Martins Point Healthcare to work with current military families and retired military. With the success of that and the research, we were able to get a contract with the Manchester VA to provide services to veterans with physical disabilities. So all along, once we started developing the rec therapy side, we were looking at what is a third-party reimbursement system that we can get paid to really do an intensive intervention with these people, with the clients that we're working with in community settings.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how the rec therapy side started.
Okay.
The true rec therapy side. It was always rec therapy, but where we really got into sort of an API process, which is assessment, planning, intervention, and evaluation. That process really started when we started the PATH program. And then at the same time we started schools. But
PATH stood for Promoting Access, Transition, and Health.
Yeah, it's funny. Every time we get a grant, we have to have a good acronym to go with it. So,
is that the secret to getting a grant?
I think so.
Okay.
That was.
I'll keep that in mind when I.
Yeah. There you go. So it's that's our secret.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So let me back up a little bit. You were trained as a therapist.
Right.
You had experience as an athlete. You had experience as a therapist, but you hadn't been a manager.
No.
And then you said, I'm going to start an organization.
Right.
And I'm going to have money and employees and insurance and all this. How did you learn all that stuff?
Oh, all that stuff is such a distraction from what you actually want to do.
Okay. But somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But the reality is, and I was young, I was late 20s and, all big eyes and save the world kind of thing. And then the reality of it was a very intensive learning curve to understand nonprofit law, liability. I mean, I had a class on, recreation and law, and I was like, oh my gosh, that stuff is so completely relevant, and had to go back and dig out those textbooks. And, I went and met with SCORP, Service Corps of Retired People,
Okay.
so
sure.
like retired accountants that would sit down with people like
the
me.
People that help small businesses get started.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And so I set up meetings with them, and I'm like, help me. I have no idea. And I looked for mechanisms to develop a nonprofit with an umbrella organization. And that's how we became a chapter of Disabled Sports USA, because I could get liability insurance, a group policy through them, as well as a blanket nonprofit status, as we were working on our own nonprofit status.
So did you spin out eventually as your own organization?
We were in the process of doing that when the merger with
UNH.
With the UNH.
Okay.
So it was one of those two directions.
Okay.
And so, it was just looking for every resource I could find on, quarterly payroll taxes. What are those? Okay.
Probably should pay them.
Probably should pay those. They tend to get cranky, the IRS, if you don't do that stuff. And liability insurance, and what do my mins and maximums have to be on that, and where is the threshold if I'm going to rent. What do most people require of me if I'm going to rent a facility? And so what are the conflict of interest policies for a nonprofit board in New Hampshire? And New Hampshire has strict conflict of interest policies, one of the most strict in the country. So quickly trying to understand how, I got a template for bylaws from Disabled Sports USA. Well, how does that fit with New Hampshire law and structure? So all of a sudden, all of this stuff that was not even on my radar when I was like, hey, let's do this, And so it became a crash course in how to run a nonprofit organization.
Okay.
So any resource that was out there that was willing to sit down with me was someone that I would go and sit down with.
Right.
So.
Okay. So a learning process over the years.
Huge learning curve.
When you came to merge with UNH, how much of that was kind of lifted off you? How much are you still having to do with that?
It lifted.
Does UNH help some?
Right. Yes. It lifted a lot. It was a tough decision though, because we were this small, nimble nonprofit. Someone sent me a bill, I wrote a check. And then with UNH, there are like 6 layers of check approval. And audits, and which are good.
But you were no longer autonomous.
Right. But it's at first, I think the bureaucracy of UNH, my board finally decided that this was the right direction to go, because all of those things that we were just talking about were a distraction to my area of expertise and what we wanted to do in the world. UNH gave us a platform to operate from. It gave us accountants and lawyers and insurance and resources in terms of student volunteers, resources in terms of faculty expertise, and a home. It gave us space. So it was a tough decision. My favorite quote from our board members when we did the vote to resolve Northeast Passage as an independent nonprofit organization and merge with the university was, he goes like, well, Jill, I guess your baby's going to college. And I was like, that's perfect, and I look back and this has been my baby, and now we're a young adult, and we're actually, it went through infancy and adolescence and going to college, and so it really can, take a human development class, and I can match up I can match that up to Northeast Passage.
Yeah.
But.
Okay. So you use the phrase strengths-based a lot in your literature.
Right.
What does that mean?
I think strength-based is it's a way at looking at your client or your patient from their strength versus their weakness. And I think that's one of the transitions that's happening in healthcare now. If you look at somebody in a medical model, you're looking at what's wrong, what don't they have, what do we need to supplement, what symptom do we need to treat. And when you're looking at a strengths-based model, you're looking at what do they have, what are the things that we can build on, how do we keep them strong, keep them healthy, keeping them moving forward and living with this diagnosis, as opposed to focusing on curing that diagnosis.
Okay.
Because in some cases, that's not going to be possible.
Right.
And so how can we teach people to live well with an illness or an injury, or a disability? and what strengths, it's essentially that. It's looking at what strengths do they have and how can we maximize those strengths for healthy living into the future.
Okay. On your website, you refer, and you've talked about this a little bit as we've been talking, you refer to community and home-based, and you were starting to talk about school-based
Right.
recreation therapy. Why is it important to have these therapies in the community, in the home? Why not just do it in a clinical setting?
Right. I think that the beauty of recreation therapy is that our tool, our modality, is a recreation experience. And within that recreation experience, you can tap into every single domain that a person has, physical, emotional, intellectual, social, within the context of that recreation. In a rehab setting, you're in a structured environment, a controlled environment. And you can practice things there, but it's not a real world experience. If we can take that learning opportunity using the context of recreation in an uncontrolled setting, it's like we have the opportunity to do real world, real time problem solving with a person who has a disability or is living with, a chronic illness. And that has so much more impact in my mind. I think where our profession needs to be pushing is in a community setting and establishing our footholds in community settings, because we've got this amazing context for teaching, and the community is the perfect backdrop for that. And helping someone to truly live beyond their disability, they have to live in that community. And so if we can do our work in that community where they're living, they're not having to transition those skills from a structured environment to a community environment. They're learning those skills where they're going to have to practice them. And so that's why I firmly believe that we need to be in the community.
And that's also why you're looking at the school-based
right.
therapies as well.
Exactly. And, we're doing a lot of work with autism in school systems. And again, recreation is such the perfect context for, with younger kids, we're looking at helping kids with autism understand the social constructs of a playground or a school system, where these things just aren't, this doesn't make sense to me, and so how do I go and, I'm on the playground. We'll treat in real settings. So we'll go to the playground with them and be like, and talk about who do you want to invite to play a game? And what are the things that you need to know to be able to invite someone to play that game, and what are the rules of the game, and what if the game doesn't go your way, and how do we manage that behavior, and do you understand why you got the reaction from the other student when you were unhappy about how that game came out, and all of those things. And so we'll use those with like elementary school students all the way up to students that are transitioning out of high school. So we'll start to look at how can I learn in a social setting the skills that I'm going to need to be successful in an interview process. So often kids with autism on the autism spectrum have the intellect to be rock stars in employment, but they don't have the social skills to either get the job or manage that work environment or a college environment. They have the academic skills to be successful. They don't have the social skills to be successful. So what we do is use recreation as a teaching context, again, for even if it doesn't come naturally for you to react to this social setting in this way, this is the way you will be successful if you're able to navigate this social setting in this way. So we'll work on those things. We'll work on, we'll do an amazing race using public transportation. So your amazing race is to find the bus that goes to the mall. When you get to the mall, you have $5. The person that comes in closest to spending $5, under $5 with 3 items wins that leg of the race, And so we're able to use all of the things. Now what we've taught is money management, and you have to be back at school by 2:00. So you're teaching time management, you're teaching public transportation, you're teaching money management, you're teaching safe strangers, you're teaching all of these things that are going to work for them once they transition out of the protection of high school into the real world.
Is this done in a group setting or an individual setting?
Both. We can do both. So I think that our therapists in the schools like groups better, because that provides that natural feedback from peers. I think that playing off the group dynamics is a great way to learn. One of the things that we had a middle school group, and they did a project runway sort of series. So what they were doing is they were learning how to give and take constructive criticism. They were learning money management. They went to Goodwill and bought fabric. They were learning sewing skills and art skills to be able to design some sort of garment for their runway, and so those are the type of things that we're doing.
Great. So in 2014, Northeast Passage received a VA adaptive sports grant that extended the PATH program to veterans and members of the armed forces who experience mental health disorders as the primary reason for the referral to the program.
Right.
What is it you're doing? How does rec therapy help with the kind of disabilities that or injuries that you're being referred now?
That we're seeing a lot of. Yes, when the VA created that opportunity for the adapted sports grants, we were really excited. And what it did, our contract with the Manchester VA was providing just to veterans with physical disabilities. This opened up the opportunity for us to provide service to veterans of any era with any disability. And so, the most predominant disability that is coming out of post 9/11, and really that is still impacting a great number of Vietnam era veterans, is post-traumatic stress, depression, substance abuse, social isolation, mild brain injury. Those are the things that are going to be the disability of this war, and really, when we go back and look, were the disability of Vietnam era veterans. So what we do with, say, post-traumatic stress or depression, once again, we go back to that assessment of what do you want your life to look like? What is it right now, and what's preventing you from being able to create that life that you want to create? What are the barriers that are preventing that? Is it, if it's a substance abuse issue, is it that, when we'll start looking at when are you drinking? Is it to stop thinking about something? Is it because that's the friend group that I'm in? Is it that I have pain? All of those things. And then what we'll start to do is say, okay, well, what can we do? Or what is it when I get stressed out? What can we do to replace that drinking behavior with something that is a positive, healthy behavior? So is it finding a group of people that do not rely on substance, that have a common interest that you can look as an island to leap to? So now we're going to go mountain biking. And when I'm mountain biking, I can't think about all the bad things that are going to happen, because I will end up on the ground very quickly.
Bad things will happen.
Right, bad things will happen. Yeah, exactly. So it is a great way to clear your mind and focus on what's happening. But we're also bringing in others that have a similar interest. So you're creating a peer group for them that is based on a healthy activity, as opposed to the peer group that goes out and sits and drinks. With post-traumatic stress, it's often uncomfortable. This is one way that it manifests itself, is being uncomfortable in crowd settings or in isolated settings or sudden loud noises, a lot of things along that line. So we'll use something, one example that I have is baseball games. We had a guy that was completely loved baseball but was not going to go to a baseball park. So we started with small baseball games, and very predictable, no stands, open space, cars right there, and started just sort of chronicling, like, what are the noises, what are the things that you can anticipate that are going to happen here, even though they're unpredictable in terms of loud noises, people cheering, people bumping you. And then we work our way all the way up to a Red Sox game, where, okay, we're going to go, where are we going to be parked? Where are we going to be seated? What would be the best seating situation for you? What are the noises and things that are typical triggers for you? What can we anticipate of that happening, and how can we mitigate that? When do we need to leave? Do we need to leave before the crowd is leaving? Do we need to sit and wait until after the crowd is gone? What's my closest exit? There might be fireworks. There might be, So just looking at all of those things and working our way up to being able to tolerate those by developing strategies that solve those problems. So it's an example that we've used and gives sort of an overview, but every one of those situations is so unique that it's really working with that person to develop the best method of overcoming those barriers. It might be woodworking. It might be,
But it's all based on the individual, their interests,
all based on
their strengths.
Right. So you have to find what is that thing that makes them tick? What is the thing that is going to get them to invest themselves in improving their quality of life? Okay. So once you find that, now you've got a place to work from with that person.
So you've got a VA grant
yes.
to do that. Mm-hmm. Long term, what would your relationship be beyond the grant? So that your issue of sustainability and kind of ongoing, are you going to be able to bill at some point, do you think? Or?
We're billing right now with the Manchester VA. And we were able to get a contract. The VA is now moving to Veterans Choice, so there will be no more direct external contracts. So what we're working on now is at a national level trying to get recreation therapy listed as a available therapeutic intervention through Veterans Choice. The VA is on board, but they're using CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid law as sort of the base template. We're not in
So there's no
CMS.
CPT code for
right.
recreational therapy section?
Well, CPT codes aren't specific to diagnosis, so there are CPT codes that we can actually, aren't specific to the person that's doing it, the therapist. So we can use, there are certain CPT codes that we can use, but there's no, honestly, there's no drop-down box for therapeutic recreation.
Okay. And
so the big national push is, do we need to have a waiver? Do we need to get CMS to recognize it in an outpatient setting? CMS it recognizes recreation therapy in certain settings, but not outpatient. So we're not a part of that menu. So while the VA wants rec therapy, the forms that they're using, well, they tell us that they want recreation therapy. And so that's where we're really having to go back and work on systems change to make sure that recreation therapy is a part of these systems so that its service is available to our clients.
Okay.
So
if it's not in the CMS system, that means you probably would have difficulty billing Medicare as well.
Correct.
For this kind of
with
therapy.
Outpatient, yes.
With outpatient.
Yes.
Okay.
But
elderly could, people who've had a stroke or
absolutely
could absolutely use this kind of service as well.
And that sort of brings us into where, for the first time, healthcare is really coming to us. The inpatient stays are shrinking. People are looking at successful transitions. You're not as much tied to a fee basis, like treating a symptom. We'll treat the symptom. We'll do this test. We'll charge for that. You're out and you're on your own. The incentives are shifting to how long did they stay healthy after those interventions. That's where we live, and that's where we need to continue to be doing the research, but where we already have research that shows that we can have an impact on improving those outcomes. So with healthcare moving in that direction, we have a real place and a real foothold. It's on our profession to be able to articulate that to the powers that be, to help them understand the role that we can play in this whole new design of healthcare. So
I just had an interview with the chief medical officer at Harvard Pilgrim, and he talked quite a bit about value-based and bundled payments and
exactly.
that kind of movement.
Yes.
So you see yourself
yes.
being able to get into that without having to get through the nut roll of fee-for-service and getting
exactly.
particular codes set up.
Exactly.
You think so the organizations that are moving in that direction are looking at organizations like you as this is another modality that could potentially help us meet that need.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So when you're looking at accountable care organization and they're looking at a population that they have to care for, top to bottom, really expensive people and really inexpensive people, we can be a tool in that toolbox to be able to help with the really expensive people, to help them become happier, healthier, more independent, in some cases more employable, that will help manage the costs of this entire population. So that's where we fit there.
All right. So that's kind of you fit very nicely into the future of healthcare.
We do. And for the first time, I always felt like we were an outlier in fee-based healthcare. And even I've had conversations with insurance companies such as Harvard Pilgrim or other providers, and it didn't make sense for them in a business model to adopt what we were doing, because often their clients would, if they had a catastrophic injury that wasn't work related, they would be discharged from rehab, and if they didn't return to work, they would be dropped into Medicare and Medicaid. So our intervention really wasn't going to impact their bottom line in a great way. Now, with the changes in healthcare, we're carrying those people through longer, and we can impact that.
That's fascinating. How did your role as the executive director change once you merged with UNH? So it kind of gave me a sense of some autonomy, maybe lost, but...
I think UNH has been amazing in that they have let us be very autonomous. They watch us very carefully, but they understand that we're on the cutting edge of what's happening in our field and tying to healthcare reform, and they give us a lot of room. I think that what changed for me is as an executive director, as a private nonprofit, I was looking very much internally at Northeast Passage, client outcomes, day-to-day operation. As part of UNH, I had to look at this from a bigger picture. I had to start to look at how do we fit within the mission of the university? Why would the UNH want us to be here? And we fit really well within a land-grant institution, service, education, research. We hit very hard on all of those things. So making sure that we are a good partner to UNH, looking at how can we have an exponential impact on the field of therapeutic recreation by preparing students, and really looking at getting our philosophies, helping them truly understand our philosophies and being able to advocate that as they become professionals. And then looking at where we fit in healthcare. So my role has really sort of shifted from looking at Northeast Passage and managing the day-to-day business to managing the big picture of how can we be a national player.
So, what you're talking about is kind of strategy.
Right.
So how do you go about developing your strategy you're talking about you're taking into consideration the interests of UNH, but what else are you thinking about kind of in the big picture of as you look 5 years into the future?
Right.
Where's Northeast Passage going to be? How do you think through that process?
We always joke about the downstairs in the therapy office. It's our theory of world domination. So
awesome.
It's we want to change the way therapeutic recreation is viewed and offered, and we want to become a player in healthcare reform. That's our goal. That's where we want to go. Strategy comes from, I have always felt that if we are very in tune with our client base and the questions that are being asked by our clients and people with disabilities, that's going to steer you in the direction that you need to look a little deeper at what's happening in that world. When we developed PATH, we developed it because we saw the impact of shortened length of stay on people getting out into the community and not being as prepared. So we watch very carefully what's happening with people with disabilities in our local environment. And then when we start to see trends with that, then we look at what's happening in the world and why is that happening. It's a little Freakonomics, kind of, But we start to do that, and then we say, is this something that we can have within our scope of practice? Can we have an impact on that? And if we can have an impact on that, how would we move forward in that way? So that's really how we develop our strategy. It starts very grassroots, then we start to look at what's happening in the world that's causing this, and then is this a problem that we can have an impact on or not? And I think that's also the challenge, is understanding are we a piece of this, or are we the answer to this, or are we not involved in this? And we need to be just steering people in we can't help you with this, but go look over here. Okay.
Okay. How has your strategy changed over time? How has it changed since you founded the organization? Do you have a very different vision of what Northeast Passage should be from back in the early days?
I think the thing that's been really cool is I go back and I look at some of our, my early, writings and everything, and our mission statement. we're on track. It's just we're becoming more evolved, and we're able to impact things on a larger scale. We just trademarked the Living Beyond Disability, and that's what we're trying to do. We don't want people to just survive beyond a disability or a chronic illness. We want them to truly thrive beyond that. Using recreation, I mean, if you start to look at it, it really boils down to, if people are happier, they're healthier, they're more employable, they get better faster from the same thing as someone who's not happy. Recreation is the perfect tool to be able to do that. And how can we manipulate our modality for the greatest positive good? And I think that that's one of the things that I feel really good about, the fact that even at that early stage, we had this vision, and we've just been building on that vision from day one. It looks very different. It's much more sophisticated now. But the vision of, at the end of the day, what we want to accomplish is the same. And just how can we do that for more people, for a more diverse group of disabilities, and nationally? What can we do to help people start to apply these principles nationally?
Can you briefly describe your organization as it currently sits? Like, what do I have? You're the executive director. How does the rest of the organization look, and how big is it?
So there's 18 staff
Okay.
right now, and I have myself, an associate director, and then I have directors of adapted recreation, competitive sport under our adapted sports, and then under rec therapy I have a director of schools and a director of PATH, which currently is veteran services.
Okay.
And then I also have an administrative team.
Okay. Okay.
So I have 11 therapists, and then I have an event planner, organizer kind of person, and coaches.
Okay.
So that's.
Do you have a lot of volunteers still?
We have fewer volunteers now, even though we're bigger, because our tie to the university. So within the academic year, we're working with almost 300 students a year. And so what used to be volunteer roles are now being filled by students, either on internship, in practicum, in student projects, in service learning. And so
it's unpaid labor.
It's unpaid labor, but the thing that was nice about volunteers is they invested long-term, and their skills grew with their investment. With students, they're brand spanking new every year,
Right, yeah.
And so we're constantly in a process of teaching and training, and that's good. That's something we brought on as part of our service to the university. That's exactly why we're here.
Right.
But it changes the dynamic. We're not a typical volunteer management organization,
right,
because of the number of students that we're a living lab for.
Okay. So if you don't mind, let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about leadership.
Okay.
So you're the executive director of the organization, not just a therapist.
Right.
You've grown an organization from an idea into what it is today. How has your leadership style changed over the years as a result of the experiences you've had and to accommodate the additional scope?
I think that I was so protective of the model and the way that I wanted things to happen early on that I was pretty tightly involved in every aspect of what was happening, and this is the way I want it done. And just being a little rigid in how I was doing it because I was protective of the model. Then it sort of evolved as I evolved and got a little more help. I started looking, is it different or wrong? And so as people started to bring in differing theories on how to do things, I would just sit there and ask myself, different or wrong, different or wrong? And often the answer was different and good, and started to really appreciate how different perspectives could still build on a model. And so, the growth in my leadership has really been, understanding, it's kind of a good to great kind of model. It's get the right people on the bus. And if they're talented people that understand the vision, buy into the vision, they're huge contributors to the success of that vision. And making sure that I am giving extremely talented people the opportunity to create, giving them a tremendous amount of freedom and autonomy, but a tremendous amount of responsibility. And it is remarkable to me how much people, with that sort of environment and making sure that they are completely aware of the fact that I care about them first and foremost, how much they have bought into this whole, it's not mine anymore, it's ours, you know, and they're buying into it and they want to make a difference. And, you know, my events and sort of director of organization will, you know, when people are leaving the office, she just yells out, "Go change lives," you know, and that's kind of it's a joke, but it's happening, and we take that very seriously. You know, we take very seriously the fact that people are trusting us with what the next phase of their life is going to look like. And, you know, we talked about the sort of the world domination. It's that, you know, both my PATH and TREC models, which are the schools and the veterans models, these have a real place in the future of healthcare. And the directors of those programs have grabbed onto that and has become absolutely their passion. So it's like I have learned to trust people with my dream and making sure that I have the right people in place to go out and make this bigger than anything I ever could have imagined it could be.
How do you know when you have the right people? How do you find the right people?
It's really, you know, it's as much, you can see their talent, and, you know, from resumes and referrals and, you know, just sort of getting an essence of who they are. I love it when people come and volunteer for us to see how they interact with us. But then I think a lot of it is sort of a gut feeling about, you know, in their answers to interview questions, are they articulating a passion for this field? Do they want this job, and can they do this job? And are they going to make this job better than it was when they came into the job? And it's listening to them and understand, and you have to be able to feel that sense of passion. If someone comes in and is like, the definition of therapeutic recreation is to rehabilitate, remediate, and, you know, I'm like, that's, you know, no, I want to know what you feel about this profession. I want to know what you see as its potential, and really watching for that spark. I think that's how you know.
How would you describe your leadership philosophy?
I think that it is really the concept of trusting the people that you have and giving them room to be contributors to the organization. But also, at the same time, someone just said this to me the other day, and I thought it was great. I'm a leader, but sometimes I have to be the boss, you know, and I consider all of them leaders. But we have to operate within this vision of where we're going and the mission of what it is that we're doing. And if we get off track, or if we're doing something that's counter to the productivity of the whole team, you have to come back, and I have to pull you back on that. But if you are moving along and doing great things, I'm your cheerleader, and I will do what I can do to help you be successful.
What are the characteristics and behaviors of a good leader, and how do you aspire to those yourself?
I think, for me, you know, a strong leader is someone that has a strong vision. It's the ability to find talented people that buy into that vision. It's to give people a lot of responsibility, a lot of flexibility, but also being willing to hold people accountable. I think it's the ability to create a supportive team so that the team can build on each other and feed on each other, because the group brain is so much stronger than the individual brain. And I think it's always saying thank you. You know, I mean, it's as simple as that, letting your people know that they're appreciated.
Can you give an example of a leader you worked with who you have tried to emulate?
You know what, I couldn't come up with that.
Okay.
It's like I take pieces, you know, and I take things that I know that I didn't like in other work settings. And I think the biggest thing is, when I was working in rehab, you were so confined to what needed to happen in every day. You have to be accountable for every 15 minutes. You're accountable to the bottom line. You have to be here within these hours. And that, to me, was so stifling to the creativity that that could happen if you gave people some flexibility and you understood their, I have a sick child, or wow, I'm just spent today, well, don't come, but tomorrow I know that because I gave you that, you're going to give me 120% tomorrow, and so it's really just sort of been paying attention to pieces of what leaders do and trying to build them into my own philosophy.
Uh-huh. Can you give an example of a difficult leadership lesson that maybe you had to learn the hard way?
Yeah, I think that we hit on that a little bit earlier. You can find really talented people that sometimes just don't fit. Okay. And as hard as you try to make them fit into the culture of your organization and buy into the vision, and you thought all of the pieces were there, and they're not. And even though they're a talented contributor, they are in some way, because they're not buying into that vision or that philosophy or that culture, they're actually pulling the team down. And how do you help that person move on into another career or job because they're talented? It's not that they're bad at their job, it's just that they're not a good fit. Okay. And that's a tough thing to do.
Sure. Can you give me an example of a leadership challenge that you're particularly proud of having met? I mean, your whole organization is pretty amazing.
That's what I was going to say. I think that when I look at Northeast Passage, the fact that we've been able to evolve as an organization, as we learn, we haven't ever lost sort of the spark for excitement about what we're doing, because we're like, wow, that worked. Where else could that go? And so I think that I have to say that the leadership challenge has been the different thing that Northeast Passage throws at me every day or every year. And can we make it bigger and better? And not necessarily bigger, but better and more impactful. And, figuring out what is that balance. And I would say that every year there's been a different leadership question that I've had to respond to with this organization. And that's been fun. That's what keeps it exciting.
That's neat. What is organizational culture, and why is it important? And specifically, what aspects of organizational culture are particularly important to you?
We have some really simple rules. Organizational culture is so important because it's where you live a huge percentage of your life. And you have to fit with the culture of the organization. We have some really basic rules for it's don't make someone else's job harder. Trust that your coworker is absolutely doing the right thing, because we've hired a talented person for that job and we know they can do the job. Trust that even if they're out weird hours and doing, and you're not seeing them, trust that they're absolutely doing the right thing, because that gives you a sense of support in your work. As an individual, that's a tremendous responsibility, because you have to absolutely be doing the right thing. And if you break that trust, the whole culture kind of crumbles a little bit. So it's making sure that all of the people that are on board understand their responsibility in how we create this supportive environment. I want them to know that they're cared about. I want them to be happy to come to work. We allow for a loose structure because it works. It gets the creative juices of the team flowing when we have a looser structure. We're finding that as we grow, we have to develop systems that aren't as loose, or else we lose track of people. So we're designing the technological systems to create the structure for us so that we can maintain the culture at a human level. And that's a leadership challenge that we're going through right now. We've grown so much in the last 3 years. We've added 7 people. And how do we maintain the culture, the human culture that we've created that's been so productive from a creativity standpoint, without losing track of who's got the vehicles, where are you now, I need this resource, did you return that phone call? So technology is coming into place, to give us that structure so that we can maintain our human culture. We have mandatory fun days. Come on.
Okay. So, did you have a mentor or mentors early in your career? You mentioned someone.
Yeah, I really did. I would say that Janet Sable was my mentor, and okay. She's retiring this year, and it's going to be a very different world for me not having Janet around. She was on my first board of directors. Without Janet was the person that wrote grants helped me get our first federal. She's a master at writing federal grants, and I don't think that we would have made the transition to a sustainable organization without her influence, her teaching me grants. I think I would have been a good idea in the trunk of my car for a long time that was helping 23 people and limping along. She showed me the importance of, wow, you have a really good idea. Let's get this on a bigger stage so that people can learn from what we're doing. She made me present at national conferences. She helped us write and publish articles. She made me get a master's degree. And I mean, made me get a master's degree, which I need. I need that from the knowledge base, the credibility, I'm at a university institution. So it's going to be very different, even though we don't need each other day to day as much as we used to. It's been a real security blanket to be able to walk into her office, shut the door, and just talk it out. And I'll miss that.
So what do good mentors do?
I think that good mentors take a look at what you're doing well and talk and praise you for that, but they're looking at it from the outside and they can see your holes as well, the places that you need improvement. And they help you come to realize that is a hole as well, as opposed to saying, wow, you're really not doing very well in this part of it. It's like, hey, how can we look? These are great things that you're doing over here, but how do we fill this void? And what are the skills that you need? How can we get you those skills to improve this part of it and make this part of the organization stronger? And I think it's also being willing to jump in and be like, wow, you don't have time to do that. I'm going to just do this piece. We're going to get it done, and let's move on with the business at hand. And we've had other universities call us and ask us how to do what it is that we've done here at UNH. And we had someone actually come up on sabbatical and sit down and interview us for hours. And we were looking at each other like, wow, to actually map it out for another university to replicate is almost impossible. And I think that is because of the mentorship and the partnership that we were able to develop and be willing to sort of go with it as it evolved, So that was huge.
What advice would you give to people who see a social need the way you did and want to meet it by creating an organization like Northeast Passage? Not necessarily to do exactly what you did, but some other need perhaps.
Right.
What education and experience should they get before they jump in? Or should they just jump in?
Well, I guess the best advice I can give is to, if you're truly passionate about it, by all means, go and do it. The thing to realize, however, is that it's going to be harder than you ever imagined it would be. Like, people have said, can you come out and help us develop this somewhere else? I'm like, no. No, I can't. It is absolutely hard. It is 100% consuming. It is a decision that you make that means that you can't make some other choices. It's 100% worth it. But I think it's just know what you're getting yourself into. And, understand that, like, the mission, the thing that you want to do is only a part of what is involved in making an organization go. And so you end up not getting to do the fun stuff to make the organization go. You have to pay attention to the insurance and the board and the liability and the risk management and the policies and procedures. And that's not necessarily the fun stuff that originally got you into wanting to do this. And I think to be aware that is going to consume a bunch of your time. Sometimes I joke about it. I'm like, it's my little shop of horrors. It's feed me Seymour.
The non-therapy aspects of the job.
It's like the bigger it gets, the more that I love growing a plant, but now the bigger the plant gets, the more it wants. It's little shop of horrors, and you just have to be aware that the side of the business and maintaining the business is going to take a tremendous amount of time away from what it is that social concern that you really wanted to fix. So that's
okay. So what advice do you have for people who might want to explore a career in recreational therapy?
I think dive in. I think it's an exciting time for recreation therapy. I think that healthcare is coming to us. CNN Money, was it CNN Money? I think did a story 2 years ago and said that therapeutic recreation is, of all professions, it's ranked number 9 in its potential to save the world, and it's for saving the world. It's an opportunity to interact with people on a level that you don't get in the other therapeutic professions because you're on their turf. You're doing something that is familiar to them. If disability comes into your world and you're a family that has just given birth to a child with a disability and you're an outdoor family, we can work with that family on how you're going to continue to be an outdoor family even though now you have a child with a disability. We're in their world, making their world better. I think a lot of other therapies are building blocks and critically important, but we get to take that next step with our clients, and that's tremendously powerful. You're not going to get paid often as much as you will in some of the other professions, so I guess it's really just weighing out, do you want to live to work or work to live, And so if this strikes your interest, dive in. It's a young enough profession, you can make a huge difference. Go for it.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. This is really inspiring.
You're welcome. Thank you for your interest in us. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Health Leader Forge, a joint production of the College of Health and Human Services at the University of New Hampshire and the Northern New England Association of Healthcare Executives. Please go to our website, healthleaderforge.org, for more information or to leave comments about today's podcast. Look for Health Leader Forge podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and other podcast distribution sites. Thanks for being a part of the Health Leader Forge community, and we'll talk with you again in about 2 weeks.